Good day, everyone, and welcome to the TEFL Academy's webinar. Today is Saturday, the 4th of November. I cannot believe how this year has flown, but I'm very happy to be here with you today and to share some information, some useful information to help you on your teaching journey. So feel welcome, get cozy, and we'll get started. So I am, as mentioned earlier, Luan, and I am from sunny South Africa, Cape Town specifically. And it would be great to hear where you're from. So please, when you have a chance, pop your name and location in the chat function on the side of your screen so that we can greet you a little bit later on. So while we wait for those names to come in, a little bit about me and what I do. And yeah, it's brief. I am a language practitioner, a speaking examiner, and a tutor and teacher trainer. Also, as mentioned, an English teacher, and that's been for over 13 years. And during that time, I have taught students of all ages, all levels, and from all over. It's been wonderful. And I'm very, very excited to be part of your journey today. So let's see who we've got. Those names have just started flooding in, and that's always a great feeling. So we've got Timothy, and Timothy is from South Africa. Hello to you. We have Carol from Jamaica. Welcome again, Carol. We have Julie from Canada. Sandra from Ireland. Welcome to you. Nick from Cape Town, South Africa as well. And Christo from Bloemfontein, South Africa too. And OC is from a cold and rainy London. I'm so sorry. It's so beautifully sunny here today, so you're allowed to feel just a little bit jealous. And then we have Rudy from Southern California. Hello, Rudy. Mariam is from Turkey. Hi to you. John from Edinburgh. Welcome. Sanette from Antigua and Barbuda. Yeah, I think I've got that right. Welcome to you. Judy's also from Grenada. Hello. And Alex from France. Gigi from Cape Town. Abbas, hi to you too, from Johannesburg, South Africa. So I am sure those names will keep coming in. So if you do pitch in a little bit later, that's fine. Just feel welcome and enjoy today's webinar and what we have prepared for you. We always try to make our webinars really interesting for you, but not only interesting, but packed with useful information to get you started on your teaching journey. Right, so just a little bit of housekeeping. We are going to discuss a very particular topic today, and then the questions that you may have, particularly related to today's topic, will get answered. So my advice, as I always say in these webinars, is to write down your questions as they come to your mind. And then later on, towards the end of the presentation, we will definitely have a Q&A where you're more than welcome to ask all those important questions. We will try to get to as many of them as possible. But as I always mention, if I do not get to every single question, you are more than welcome to pop them in at tutor support, where our tutors will be on standby to answer any questions related to today's webinar or otherwise. But as mentioned, today specifically, we will only be answering questions about the content in the webinar. I hope that's clear and I hope that's okay. All right, so I think it's important to just get started. The topic today is really, really interesting because as a teacher, we build resources, we collect resources, and we use these and we recycle these and we share these with other teachers. So today we're going to be looking at creating and adapting teaching resources. A very specific and unique topic, but something that is so important, particularly to newer teachers, because you start collecting your resources, you start looking at what interests you, you start looking at what interests your students. And this is why today's webinar will be so useful to you. All right, so I think the important thing is that we just get started. Before we do that, I've got so many other names coming in, and I'd really like to say hi to you. So we've got Fergus from Norwich, Laura from Argentina, Quinn from Canada, Asha from New Jersey, and Hillary, London too. And then we have Dean from Berlin. Hello to you. And Elena from the UK. Feel welcome and enjoy the presentation. All right, so let's get started. When we think about resources and specifically creating and adapting teaching resources, there are a few questions that we ask ourselves. Do I search for suitable materials on the internet? Do I create my own materials? Also, do I recycle existing materials? It's very, very tempting to use other people's resources and adapt them. But sometimes this takes longer than creating the materials yourself. And if I think about my teaching career, and probably the way you see it too, is that time saving is everything. As teachers, we're busy. Our jobs do not end the minute we leave the classroom or the minute we leave the school or the minute we click end, to an online lesson. Our work carries on. So we've got a lot to do, and preparation is key. So the more we can do to reduce this time, the better. So today we're going to really look at what to consider when creating and also adapting teaching resources. Right. So when we are, at the start of this topic, thinking about resources, what to do, how to adapt them, do I adapt them? Do I create my own? There are a few questions to ask yourself. So think about the subject. How much do I know about the subject? Also, what do my students need to learn? So there are, of course, many resources out there, beautifully presented visuals, but are they really relevant to what my students need to learn? Also, a student survey. Have I done one? What are the interests and the needs of my students? And then also ask yourself, what resources do I already have? As teachers, we collect things along the way, and we might already be sitting on quite a good deal of useful stuff. So ask yourself, go through your files and see what you already have. And then also, something very important to me and most EFL teachers is the language level of our students. At the beginning of my career, I was just throwing any bit of material at students, not really considering whether the level was appropriate or not. And this is a rookie mistake, and it's okay. But the more prepared we can be and the more in tune we are with the level of our students, the more they get out of the lesson. And that's always a great feeling. And then also think about the demographics, the age of your students, the culture, background. So all those elements are important to consider when gathering or when adapting or when creating resources for your classroom or materials for your classroom. Right. And then a few other things to consider would be, is the lesson or the materials that I'm collecting, is it for an online lesson or is it for a face-to-face lesson? Can I use it for both? Also, copyright. Think about the legal implications of duplicating materials. Am I allowed to do that? And then also check what the rights are. Check for Creative Commons resources. Check for legal implications. Check what you're allowed to use, what you're not allowed to use, and also how to carefully reference things that you do use. And then also, am I to use authentic materials or semi-authentic materials? Or am I to use materials that are specifically created for students learning English? Those are important factors to consider too. And we'll have a slightly deeper look at authentic materials a little bit later on. And then also cost and time management. Because if you think about all those resources out there, they're all great, but some of them cost. And some of them you've got to pay, or you've got to sign up, or you've got to subscribe. So just think about what's freely available. I always say to teachers, yes, of course, if something is affordable for you or inexpensive, then go for it and subscribe. But as far as you can, try to collect as many free materials as possible, particularly at the start of your career. Right. And then also, something important to consider is to really have engaging and interactive materials. Your students really need to be aware that you've gone through some preparation time and you've really thought about them and what would stimulate and create interest. So something that's engaging, something that's interactive, those materials are out there. Also, Realia. Would you like to use Realia? in your lessons. So you have various sites out there like teacher made or interactive sites. um, think about whether the students have access to the internet, whether the internet is in fact necessary for these sites. And then, as mentioned earlier, Realia, are you going to use Realia to supplement and to enhance the material that you're sourcing or that you're searching for? And then, as mentioned also, technology. Is there technology required in order to use the material that you are considering? When I think about different types of material, as teachers, we immediately think about something printed, something tangible that we can give our students. But remember that there are also other options out there. Um, Online interactive materials, visuals, and other media resources that we can use in the classroom. Right, and now we're going to look at the different kinds of resources, some of those things that we mentioned in the previous slide. So yes, as mentioned, the good old traditional printed material, that would be worksheets, newspapers, handouts. So those are available, and some of them freely available on the internet. And then, of course, there are the online interactive activities and materials that you can use. And this would involve things like interactive worksheets, pronunciation lessons, activities that really get learners involved and interacting not only with each other, but maybe some online material. And then visuals. I am a big, big fan of using visuals in the classroom. Pictures, photos, artwork, illustrations of some kind, and they very often explain difficult or abstract concepts of grammar or vocabulary very, very well. And remember, as teachers, we are always trying to reduce our teacher talk time. And visuals very often do the speaking for you. And that's why I particularly love using them in the classroom. And then we also mentioned media resources earlier, and these would be things like blogs and YouTube videos, little movie clips, songs, podcasts. These are all resources that give your students a sense of satisfaction that they've mastered something that you've sourced from something as general as the media. And then also remember to have a backup plan, because very often the internet will fail us, or technology in general. And then, of course, you've got your paper worksheets to fall back on if the internet does, in fact, go down. That happens occasionally to me during a lesson, or to many teachers, I'm sure. So always have something tangible in your back pocket as a backup plan if that does, in fact, happen to you. And as mentioned, it certainly does. All right, so when it comes to using online resources, so many of us are tempted to use the internet and to use online resources because I think that it really, really gives our students a sense of accomplishment once they've mastered something like this. But it is our responsibility to really select the websites very, very carefully. Make sure that the content is accurate. Very often, you see resources on the internet and they look fantastic. But look a little deeper. Have a look at the content, the script, the text, and do make sure that it's an accurate representation of what you're trying to get across. Mistakes in resources that you present to your class, not ideal, because these mistakes could really mislead or confuse your students. Right, and then also make sure that the resources that you're using are in fact suitable for your particular class. Check the content, check the language grading of the materials, and make sure that you are presenting something that really, really is suitable for the group of people you've got in front of you, or for the one student if you're teaching face to face in a one-on-one situation. And then also check copyright, Creative Commons. Just make sure that the material that you're sourcing or using, that you're legally allowed to do so. So do a little bit of research on that. We've got some information on our online course that could help you. But as a teacher, because laws are always changing and things are always shifting a little bit, it is always advisable to keep on top of things by doing as much research as you possibly can. And then something important to consider, and this is very, very important to me, is hidden cost. Check if you have maybe a lifetime access or just a temporary free access, a 30-day access. Check that after the 30 days, you don't get charged for something or sent a bill. So just make sure what the black and white, what the details are before clicking on accept or before clicking on subscribe or enroll. So just do, teachers have homework too, just do a little bit of homework before you access these various resources online. And then also, does the resource need editing? So remember that editing can take quite long. So make sure that you've got the time to edit something if you are going to go with something that does need editing. And also depends on what kind of material. Make sure that you're able to edit. So yeah, quite a lot to consider when it comes to using online resources. Oh, but they're ever so wonderful to use in the classroom, particularly with learners who do enjoy the interactive and online aspect of what we're talking about today. And then to continue with using online resources, because there is so much to cover, also make sure that when you're using an interactive site, is it a self-grading exercise? Do students have access to the answers immediately? And if no answers are automatically provided on the site, you will need to work out the answers yourself, and this could also be time consuming. So that's something to check before you say, right, this is the exercise I'm going to use. Check whether the answers are available, and if they're not available, well, then factor that time into your planning process. And then also classroom management. Now, when it comes to online resources, you've got to think about the fact, can students get distracted? Can they access other sites? Or will they go off topic by clicking on a link to another website, for example? So if you're using online resources in the classroom and students actually have live access to these, it does take a little bit of monitoring on the part of the teacher just to make sure that everybody is doing the task that they're meant to be doing and not scrolling and going elsewhere on the site, which is ever so tempting, particularly if they're young learners and they want to explore. Make sure that you monitor and stay on top of this. And then also, availability of the links, for example. Do make sure that you've checked the links before your lesson, because with the internet and with online resources, something that was available 2 weeks ago and you've used it in a lesson might not be available this week, or the link might be broken. So do check links before your lesson. And if those links are broken, have a backup exercise or a backup link with a similar exercise that you can use in your lesson. Or if it's a link to a particular picture, have a backup just in case. That has literally happened to me, where I use an exercise 1 week and I use it with a different class or a different student a week later, and that link is no longer an option for me. So do check that beforehand. And then also keep a list of the links that you use. Keep references, because remember, as teachers, we're always recycling material and we're sharing material. And if another teacher comes to you in the teacher's room and says, hey, do you have a nice exercise on the first conditional or the past continuous, then at least you can actually give them something tangible and say, right, this is a great exercise, here's the link, go for it. And you know what I always say, when you help another teacher and you're in need of an exercise, that favor will come right back to you. And then also have a backup plan. So power supply, if the power supply fails or for whatever reason things are not working, make sure that you have a backup plan. I think that you're going to hear that phrase come up quite regularly today, backup plan, because in a classroom things happen, particularly when we're trying to access materials or find something on the internet. Things happen, so always make sure that you have a backup plan. Right, so the very next thing that we're going to visit is using and adapting authentic materials. Right, so let me change the slide. So when it comes to authentic materials, what are they? Right? So authentic materials are materials that are not created for an English lesson. These are materials like texts or videos that are not created for English learning. So as soon as you see something on an English learning site or something on YouTube that is taken off an English learning site, that is not an authentic material, because that material, that video, that story, that those slides, or they were created specifically for English learning purposes. That is not an authentic material. What is an authentic material? Well, things you and I just click on and read for entertainment, for information, those are authentic materials. So think about news articles, think about blogs, think about menus, think about songs that we listen to. So if something has not been created for an English lesson, but merely to inform or entertain a first language English speaker, then it's authentic. Right. So when it comes to using authentic materials, what is the aim? Step one, consider the aim. What will students know or be able to do by the end of the lesson? So using authentic materials is fine and well, but you've got to have an aim. There's got to be a reason why you're introducing that authentic material, that piece of text, or that video, or that menu, or that postcard, or that blog to your students. Step two, when sourcing authentic materials, select a theme, have a context, a specific situation. So if, for example, you're teaching food items, then yes, a menu is really relevant to that lesson. If you're teaching directions or prepositions of place, then maybe two people talking about where to find a particular cinema or mall, shopping center, then yes, that would be relevant to that situation. So always make sure that there's a running theme, a context that is related to the authentic material. And then also, step three, select appropriate resources suitable for your class, for their aims and their objectives. So make sure that you understand what it is that they have to learn before you select your material. And also, does the resource need to be adapted in any way? So remember, if we change the language, the vocabulary, the grammatical structures in a text, then that text is unfortunately no longer authentic. It is at most semi-authentic, or then it has been adapted for a classroom purpose and is no longer authentic. So remember, you can shorten something, no problem. You can remove maybe superfluous bits of information. You can remove offensive bits of information. In a text, you can remove or on a site, a text that you got from a site, and you remove the advertisements and the links, it would still be authentic. However, the minute you change the language in that text to suit the level of your class, then no, that is no longer authentic. So do ask yourself, if my aim is to use something authentic, how far do I need to adapt this? What are my limitations here? Right. So when it comes to authentic material, I love using authentic material, but do make sure that if you are adapting it, that your students know you've adapted it, so that if they go and find that piece of material online or wherever, and they see that it's changed, they do know that you've adapted it and that they've unfortunately then not worked with authentic material. So always have transparency in your lessons. Right. And then when it comes to creating your own resources. Now, this is something fantastic for teachers to do, but again, something that takes time. So make sure that you've in fact got the time. So as with existing resources, you need to consider things like the demographics. Again, as mentioned earlier, the age, the background, the culture, things like religious aspects. Those are things that you need to consider before creating your own resources and, in fact, sourcing any materials online. And then also the aims and objectives. Is it for assessment? Is it for a lesson on something specific? What is the aim of the lesson and what are the objectives during the lesson? So remember, the objectives are the little steps we take within a lesson in order to achieve the aims. And also, what is the topic to be covered? What is the skill that you are trying to get your students to improve? And then something very important to me, Language grading. So remember, if you're working with a level A2 class, sourcing materials online, creating your own, you need to consider their level. If you're creating your own materials, well, then it's relatively easy to grade your language just right for the level of your students. If, however, you are sourcing something authentic and you're looking for something online or out there to bring into your lesson, then the challenge is a little bit more because now you need to find something that isn't too overwhelming in terms of level for your students. And then also safety considerations. Make sure that things like privacy or just general well-being in your class. So yeah, when creating those materials, just be sure that it creates a secure and safe environment for everyone. So we are still on creating your own resources. And another thing that we need to consider is whether we are going to be using, as mentioned earlier, authentic or resources created specifically for EFL students. Decide what works best for your class, particularly if you have the luxury of deciding. Then do make sure that you choose what works. I love mixing it up, particularly with my higher level learner classes. Authentic materials, fantastic for them. With my lower levels, I have to be a little bit more selective of the authentic materials I bring in. So I always find myself creating a little bit more with the lower levels. But this depends on you and what works, as we mentioned earlier, for your particular class. And then also take into consideration the learning styles. Are your students visual? Are they kinesthetic? Try to create materials that cater for all learning styles. Because I will tell you, in a classroom of a few students, there are so many different learning styles, and it's fantastic. It's interesting, and it does encourage you and challenge you as a teacher to really try and incorporate aspects that would relate and really speak to the learners with those various styles. And also, when creating your own resources, what type of technology is required with that resource? And if online, of course, here it comes again, have a backup plan if technology fails. Right. And we're moving on to the next slide, and surprise, surprise, it's still creating your own resources. But now we're going to look at a few more physical aspects to consider, practical aspects when creating your own materials. Font size, font type. Make sure that it's simple, make sure that it's clear, and make sure that people don't need to really struggle to see what's on the worksheet. Make sure that there's access for all students and that it's visually suitable. Then, if there are graphics, if there are images, make sure that if you haven't paid for anything specific, make sure that they are free, that they have a Creative Commons license, or you could create your own. Very often, if I can't find something really suitable online for free, I end up just taking pictures with my phone of what I'm trying to get across, and I bring those into the classroom, provided then, of course, that your learners are, that it links to the lesson and that it's interesting for your learners. And then, of course, the suitability of visuals. If, for example, you're looking at a very young class, well, then you can go with child-centered imagery. But when it comes to adults, maybe some realistic photos rather than animated or cartoons. And also remember, not all cartoons are suitable for children. So do be quite selective with your imagery and do consider the age of your students. In our assignments or tasks on our online courses, we very often ask you to take into consideration the age. Maybe it's an adult class, but then we get sent really child-centered imagery. And we've always got to remind you, do be aware of the age and interest and background of your students before choosing photos or imagery. And then also, time management for content creation. As mentioned earlier, it takes time to create your own stuff. So do factor this in during your planning process, of course. Right. So the next slide, we're going to show you a few interesting places to find resources. So the TEFL Academy, we've got blogs, we've got our online content with various resources that you can use, of course. Just be sure to reference us if you do use us going forward. And then the British Council as well. It's something that I use quite regularly in my lessons, content from the British Council. EF, or English First, Education First. They also have some great resources and exercises that you can use in your lessons. ESL Lounge, just loads and loads of useful resources for teachers, whether it be lesson plans or exercises or just prompts and imagery in order to get your lesson going, loads of things. And then also something that I love using in my class is TED Talks, but then TED Talks have also got TED Ed. Now, these videos are created for English speakers, just learning about various subjects. So if it's not specifically to teach English, then TED and TED Ed are fantastic to use, even as authentic materials in your classroom. And then also ESL Galaxy. I'm sure that as I go through these, some of you have already explored these or used these, or just sort of use these for your own research when completing assignments and grammar lessons. So yeah, by all means, go for it. These are fantastic resources. And then there's good old Google. If you can't find anything that is just right in these other sites, yeah, Google. But as we mentioned earlier, do check that the content is accurate and suitable for your class from a background, cultural, level perspective also. Right. And then finally, just to wrap up, just a few things to consider before we wrap up. Do proofread. Every single thing that you show or give to your students, make sure that it is mistake free. Unless it is a spot the error exercise, it really shouldn't contain errors. So do check the work, the content, the text, the video beforehand. And that's another thing. Videos, teachers, if you do use a video or if you find a great video, check that it's not too long for your lesson. Check that there are no offensive bits of language in the video. Watch it from start to finish. Does it get interrupted with ads? So always check the material. Either proofread, check the text for level, as mentioned earlier, offensive bits, and videos, always pre-watch them before you show them to your students. Also, just make sure once you've created the resource or once you've sourced the material, does it relate to the lesson, the aims, the objectives? Does it relate to formative or summative assessment? Test the material. Try it on a couple of students. Do the exercises yourself. Time yourself. See how long it would realistically take your students to do the exercises. So these are all things to do. And I love testing my own materials because I always think, right, I have finished this or I finished it in 5 minutes. Now, my students being B1 level students, they might take twice as long. They might take twice as long and then some. So absolutely test the material, check it for time, check it for errors, make sure that it's classroom ready by the time you use it. It's a fun process to source materials. I often see in the assignments that you submit, a lot of you say, I enjoyed the creativity aspect of creating my own materials. I enjoyed the adventure of searching for something that would be great to use in my lessons. So yeah, enjoy the process and don't be afraid when creating materials. Don't be afraid when trying them out on your students. If you've covered all the bases, if you've checked the materials, you're good to go. Enjoy the process, and your learners will enjoy it too. Right, so we've come to the end of my presentation, but of course, now you've got the opportunity to type your questions in the chat function. So remember, I asked you to hold on to those questions because very often I miss them if you type them too early on because they sort of come up between all the hellos and the welcome. So please now, if you have any questions relating to today's topic, just put them in the chat function and I will get to as many of them as possible before we end. Right. So we've got a few questions that have already come in, and that's always a great thing. Right. And now we're going to start answering these questions. Okay, so I've got a couple of questions here. Let's see. Right. This is a great question. Once Upon a Tale. Nice username. Right. So, how can you check whether materials are authentic, semi authentic, or not authentic? So, as mentioned earlier, remember that if you have found something on a site or in a book or in a magazine that it was created just for interest, for people to click on and read, for people to pick up that magazine and read it, for people to click and watch a video just for entertainment or to learn about a particular subject. For example, I watched an amazing video on a jewelry collection in a museum the other day. It was wonderful. That would be authentic material. So that is material, authentic, that has not been created or adapted in any way for English learning purposes. And very often you will find material on English learning sites like Learn English with blah, 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 or Study English Today, or English First. So those are sites where the material is particularly chosen for English lessons and they are not authentic, no matter how wonderful some of the videos or texts are. So when you source authentic material, look on news sites. Look on sites like National Geographic. Look on sites like National Geographic Kids, BBC. Oh, there are so many out there. And then also food blogs, travel blogs, movie reviews, destination reviews, the menus. Those are all authentic materials. Just check whether or not you're aiming to work with a cohesive piece of text. A menu is not always very cohesive, but it's a fantastic way to teach food items or yeah. So do make sure that you check where does this material come from and what was the purpose of this material. If it was created for a lesson, not authentic. If it was created just to entertain or to inform first language speakers, then it is authentic. Semi-authentic material, that's usually when it was originally authentic, but it was then adapted or made a little bit simpler or made easier for a particular level of class. So that would be a semi-authentic bit of material. I hope that clarifies it for you. All right. All right, so the next question we have here from Quinn, is it better to teach something that is tailored to the student's culture or something unfamiliar to them? You know, Quinn, it's a fantastic question, and it's got a very what I think is that students like things in the classroom that they can relate to. Students like to be able to relate to the content. So I would say, look, first and foremost, you're teaching English. So these materials that we use are just the vehicles with which we teach the language, the vocabulary, the grammar that we're trying to teach in that particular lesson. So I find that students enjoy something they can relate to, something that they see around them, something that they know. And then, of course, if you're choosing a piece of material on travel, it's also interesting to learn about another destination. So, but still, it's something they can relate to because maybe you've got a class that enjoys travel. If you have a class that enjoys food, you could either have something that relates to their own dishes in their country or teaching them about an entirely different dish. But the core is that your students are interested in food, interested in travel. So I would say first and foremost, stuff they can relate to. Then, of course, branch out and find things that are still interesting for that particular class. And I would say, Quinn, and to everyone listening today, a needs analysis is something really, really important for you to do maybe at the beginning of your course. Maybe you've got the luxury of using your entire first lesson for it, but a needs analysis tells you as a teacher what your students are interested in, what they like reading about, what they like watching, what they like. talking about? And this very often helps me as a teacher to narrow down the topic. So remember, you are absolutely teaching English and the vocabulary of the day, but the material that you're using with which to teach that, well, that's something that you get to choose and have fun with. So I would say absolutely do a needs analysis to find out what their interests are. I'll tell you a little story. I had a student who was 11 years old, and he was from Taiwan. And I did a needs analysis with him. And this guy loved SpongeBob SquarePants. Absolutely loved it. He also loved food, loved talking about food. I think most 11-year-olds do. And he also liked talking about sports and things to do, hobbies. So I knew, great. My first lesson was SpongeBob SquarePants. I taught him adjectives and nouns through the use of the characters in SpongeBob SquarePants. And then, of course, when we spoke about asking for food and ordering food and reading menus, that was something else that he was really, really interested in, because then I brought in beautiful visuals and imagery. So a needs analysis goes a long way. Absolutely do one, just to find out what your students are interested in. All right. So a great question here. Do you have any self-grading websites to suggest? So there are many websites out there where you can, excuse me, where you can grade text. But something that we use on the that we use to grade language and just see what the language grading of a particular piece is Vocab Kitchen. Now, with text, it's relatively easy. You find the text online or you type it out, you copy and paste it, you stick it into the Vocab Kitchen profiler, and you check what the basic level is of the words. Or you could find a video you like, find the transcript, most videos have it. On the side, you copy and paste that, you put it into Vocab Kitchen, and it tells you what the level of the words are. And you can see, right, this will be okay for this class because there aren't too many above level items, or this is way too complex for this class, I can't possibly use it. That helps me every day. Not only Vocab Kitchen, there are more, but it absolutely will help you get an idea of how difficult or how easy a time your students will have with a piece of material that you are considering or chose. All right. And then Dean, you've made a comment here that I actually do want to put up on the board because I think it's so important to personalize something as much as possible so that students can relate. And that's exactly what I was mentioning earlier. If you know your student likes a particular topic and you've got the luxury of bringing in your own topics, then absolutely personalize it as much as possible. This is not saying adapt it, but to personalize lessons so that your learners can relate. And yes, it's interesting to bring in new things, absolutely, but new things related to topics that your students are interested in. Dean, I agree with you 100%. All right, and then we have a question, rather general, but very important. Where, please, can I view missed webinars? I'm not seeing previous ones. Right. So what you need to do is send us a message at Tutor Support, and we will send you the link to our YouTube channel with all our previous webinars. And then you can relax and watch as many as you like at your own leisure. Also, remember that today's webinar will be available on the YouTube channel within a couple of days or so, and you'll be able to rewatch maybe bits that you missed or bits that were not so clear or just bits that you want to revisit. You'll be able to watch this one in a few days and also have access to all our previous webinars. So remember to send us a message to Tutor Support and we'll send you the link and you can knock yourself out and have a good time with all the webinars. Right. Any other questions? Please put them in right now and I'll answer as many of them as possible. I'm just scrolling through to see whether I have actually missed any. Right. Okay, so I have a question here. Do you reuse your material for the same level, same age every year? This is something that teachers do all the time. I think it's Julie, right? We recycle material all the time. Of course, if something just doesn't have relevance anymore, or if your students are just over the topic. For example, I know that a few years ago, every teacher was showing or bringing articles about COVID safety and how to be careful and how to stay indoors and quarantine. And it was so relevant at the time, and students were just lapping it up because this is stuff that was current. But now, bring that into a classroom, and your students are a bit sort of like, something else maybe. So, still relevant, still important, still vital that we're careful, but it's maybe not a topic that they would have as much interest in as they did a few years ago. So I would say you can absolutely recycle materials, but again, just check what's relevant, see what your students are interested in right now. I often laugh at myself as a teacher because very often we do lessons about. We teach words like celebrity, or we teach all these hot topics, and you choose a celebrity and your students then tell you, but teacher, the celebrity is so 5 minutes ago, the celebrity is no longer relevant, teacher, you're old. I've had that before. So do make sure that you choose personalities, you choose content that is that's relevant to the students that you are teaching. All right, I hope that makes sense. But yes, to answer your question, we absolutely, all those things that are sort of the neutral topics, we absolutely recycle them on a yearly basis. Okay. So let's see, Dean, how much are you using AI? Can you suggest particular uses for it? What do you find it helps you with? So, Dean, I will tell you that because AI in teaching, I'm not going to say it's new, but it's relatively new. Even us at the TEFL Academy, we're still exploring. But I will tell you that we've done a webinar on AI. I don't know if you joined or if you've seen it, but also, just like I mentioned earlier, please send us a link and watch this AI webinar. I did it. It was very much learning on the job, but it also shows you how we can use AI, when we can use it, what the pros, what the cons are, and the implications for teachers. And not only from a teaching perspective, from how our students are relating to this, and also what it means for our jobs at the end of the day. So it's a fantastic webinar, and I'm not saying that because I presented it, but because of the information that I learned having to present it. So absolutely, please, please, please do watch that webinar. All right. Any other questions about the topic today? We also had a question earlier about, and I can't find it right now, but what topics to avoid when it comes to materials in the classroom. So remember that, again, I'm going to say to you that you've got to pay attention to who you have in your class and where in the world you are. And also the students that you're teaching, what is their background? What are their ages? Religious aspects, those sorts of things. So I would say there are certain topics that as teachers we just steer away from just to be safe. And I would say those things include politics, maybe even religion, any sexual content. Those are your very obvious topics to steer away from. And I would say go with more neutral material, whether it be imagery or whether it be text or whether it be videos. I hope that's helped. Right, and then we had a question also about the Creative Commons license. And actually, I think, Elena, you put something in here that would possibly answer that question. And yes, it's more like a license. So when you are putting something on YouTube or putting something on the internet, sometimes there is a license that allows other people to use it, and sometimes it's content that they can't. So absolutely just check and opt for sites where you've got free material. So as teachers, as mentioned earlier, we like to use imagery. I for one love using imagery. And at just at the end of the presentation, I will type in a name or two of sites where you can actually find material that you're able and legally able to use in lessons and show and use in presentations and so on. I think it's important to do a little bit of homework, but also to make sure that you can in fact use it. And one site that I actually like very much, I'm going to put it into the chat right now. And this is a site, it's used for sharing photos, illustrations, graphics, music, and it's under the custom license of this particular site, and it generally allows the free use of material with some restrictions, yes, but again, you'll be able to use the material, and I'm going to put it right up there now. So it's pixabay.com. I don't know if you can all see the site. Do explore it. The content is free to use. And Elena, thank you very much for answering that for me and for clarifying. And then also, as mentioned, just do a bit of research, do a little bit of homework around this so that you know what you're putting into your presentations and into your lesson, that you're legally able to do so. One of the sites I just put up there is Pixabay.com, and also something that a lot of our teachers use is teachermade.com. And most of the resources here are free to use, free to incorporate into your lessons. So have a look and see if there's anything particularly useful to you when planning your lessons. Right. So please send in. We've got a little bit of time left for some of those questions. Please send them in. All right, so we have a question that isn't really related to the topic, but you know what, I'll answer it anyway. I know this is not about assignments, but I'm hoping you can answer. Well, I think it is about assignments. When the marker puts a yes as feedback, do I need to redo that aspect? Or is it just sections with a no? So yes, this is not related to today's topic, but that's okay. We'll answer it. When the marker puts a yes, it means that section has passed. And when the marker puts a no or an N for no, it means that you need to work on that section. And usually when there's a no, there's an explanatory bit of text to tell you why, what you've done wrong, and what you can improve. If the feedback is not clear, of course, you can send us a message to tutor support. We will either try to clarify it for you immediately, or we'll send your marker a message and ask them to clarify. All right, Sonette, I hope that helps. All right. Any other questions? We've got a couple minutes left. I'm going to try and squeeze a few in. So if you do have any questions, please, please, please let me know. I am going through some of the previous questions just to see if I've missed anything. Let's see. All right, I think we've covered everything. So if we don't have any more questions, I'm going to wait just a minute or so because sometimes we've got people still typing in messages and then they come up. But I think that we've just about covered everything. And then just a reminder to those of you who are thinking to watch other webinars that we've done prior to this one, please watch them. They are so useful. And I find that very often, me for one, I like people explaining things to me rather than always just having to read the answers. So if you do have any questions, these webinars are just loaded with information that will most likely answer a few of those questions that you've got. All right, so we've got another question here, excuse me. And it says, you talked about proofreading. How can you be objective and proofread something that you've made though well? Remember, Elena, that proofreading means to check for mistakes. So proofreading is to read something again and again just to make sure that you've not included any accuracy-based errors in that text or in that content. So when it comes to proofreading, that's just checking for mistakes. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Because me, for example, I'm always writing little text, creating exercises, and I have to proofread my work again and again to make sure that I put the apostrophe in the right place, or a comma where it should be, or spell the word correctly, or not use the incorrect word. So, Elena, that's what we mean by proofreading. All right, I hope that helps. Okay, Nice question. How do we understand different ways of learning, different from our own way? So, Quinn, this is such an interesting question because I will tell you that your learners will have different learning styles. And when you walk into a classroom, I think something important to do is spend a little bit of time before jumping into lessons, before just starting with particular content or a particular lesson, get to know your students. Do a few diagnostic lessons and diagnostic activities before you start teaching and see if there are any learning styles that are a bit different to your own. Me, I for one know that I'm a visual learner. I like visuals. And I know that lots of my learners are, but some of them really tune in when there is something to listen to. Some of them really, really tune in when there's something to read. So I will tell you, create lessons and create activities that really cater to all of these. And very often that's part of the diagnosis. That's, or not diagnosis, I think it's that's part of learning who learns in which way, is by doing exercises with your learners that incorporate these various styles and then see how does this one respond? How does this one enjoy the lesson? Do students maybe crave a little bit of movement? Those kinesthetic learners, maybe I need to incorporate a little bit more of that. So you're not going to just know from the start before you walk in, Quinn. It is something that comes with getting to know your learners a little bit and incorporating various learning styles and exercises that really encourage or promote these various or support these various learning styles into your exercises and then see how your learners respond. It's a great process, and I will tell you, as long as you're still trying to incorporate all these various learning styles into your exercises, you're good to go. You're not going to have one exercise or one lesson that just works for everyone. So the idea is to look at the various learning styles and make sure that you incorporate a little bit of everything. Right. How do you choose your material if you teach an online class with students from all over the world? With difficulty. No, not true. Julie, the idea is to choose topics that are neutral. I think that would be the most important thing. So have a look at those neutral topics, those topics like travel, topics like learning about different cultures, food, very, very neutral. So when it comes to choosing topics, and you've got to choose those topics, again, a needs analysis and also incorporate topics that are neutral. I would say that's a great jumping off point. Of course, there are other things to consider to learning style, as Dean mentioned earlier, level, those sorts of things. But when it comes to topics specifically, a needs analysis does the trick, and also, as mentioned, neutral topics. I hope that helps. All right, I think we've got time for one more. And yes, exactly. Once Upon a Tale, we mentioned earlier, proofreading is to check for mistakes. Editing is really rewriting something that is a little bit more appropriate for the group of students that you're working with, or shortening or consolidating text. That would be more from an editing perspective. But proofreading, just checking for mistakes. All right. Now, let's see. I think if I look at the comments that are coming in, some of you are asking if you can ask questions about the assignments. No, this webinar is not about the assignments today, but we do have webinars specifically about the assignments. So please have a look, send us a message on Tutor Support, and we will send you the link so that you can actually watch the webinar on assignments. And then, of course, as most of you know, send a message to Tutor Support if you've got any questions about the assignments. While we cannot proofread your files or or check your activities beforehand and pass or fail them on Tutor Support, we can certainly answer your questions and just put you in the right direction. All right. And some of you are saying food might be a controversial topic. Again, as mentioned, do check where you are, what your students' interests are, if it's learning about a new food, if it's just talking about ingredients that they use in their homes, if it's a restaurant review, food can be quite a neutral topic. But Sanette, you're so right. Absolutely check what is okay in the country or with the students that you're teaching. Absolutely. All right, so that's all we've got time for today. I really hope today's webinar was helpful. I'm sure it was because I'm seeing such a lot of great comments coming in thanking us for the webinar today. It's an absolute pleasure. And I'm going to be putting a um, survey link up very, very soon. We'd like to hear from you. We'd like to hear what you thought about the webinar and also if there are any other topics that you'd like us to cover because we're always trying to make these webinars all about you. They're not about us. We've done what we need to do. We know that you're on this journey right now. So these webinars are 100% for you. So please send us your feedback. The survey link is in your chat right now. I will also be showing the survey link on the screen when we say goodbye. But yeah, just to thank you all for popping in today, for listening to me, for asking all these amazing questions. Keep asking. And if you can't ask, if you couldn't ask us today, just a little reminder, send them to tutor support and we'll be more than happy to help you. So enjoy the rest of your weekend. That is very, very important. And yeah, be safe out there and join us same time, same place next week where we'll have another interesting topic to share with you. All right, so we're going to be putting the survey link up now. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you for joining.